showtime!
About a month ago, a Reddit user by the name of Riri Do You Love Me made a Reddit poll asking users to vote on what characters they regretted pulling the most. And given that it wasn't an actual poll that people could just click a single response on, 824 responses is pretty good. They had to fill out a Google form where they could then type in their own response and then give a reasoning for why they regret pulling for said character. They even gave explanations on each of the reasons so that there was no confusion as to maybe why people voted in this category. Starting at 11 and 10, which are the least regretted on the list, and happens to be a tie between the two. Starting off with Raiden Shogun. Why would people regret Raiden Shogun? Right at the gate, I think we can eliminate two of these categories even from the possibilities, and that is dated and team synergy. She's never felt dated. You might feel that personally, but I don't think she's dated by any means or any definition. And team synergy, Raiden Shogun has so many available team comps in various different styles. Some where she's a support and some where she's the main focus as the main DPS. Now, a lot of these categories are highly subjective. Impulse pulling and buyer's remorse can happen on any banner to any person, and material gathering fatigue could also happen to literally any character. As for Raiden Shogun, however, I have one guess as to why people would regret this character, and that is her damage. No, there's nothing wrong with her damage. It is very good even at C0, but that is the problem. People think they need C2 to be good, either because they see people C2 Raiden Shogun and they assume it's C0 and they compare it to their own C0 and feel bad about it, or because possibly the far more common case, which is people love to over-exaggerate the importance of the C2 and think she is only viable because of it, which is strictly not the case. C0 Raiden Shogun is still very strong, and sadly, this is not the only time a character will suffer from this, as we'll talk about later. So let's just quickly move on to Wanderer, because neither of these characters have a lot of votes. Raiden is just kind of a little bit more interesting. As for Wanderer, I don't really know why people would regret this character necessarily, aside from being an animo DPS. That means he's limited in team comps, so he doesn't really have a lot of versatility necessarily, even though with his passive he technically does. However, one factor that may make people really regret him is if they never got C6 Farazan or don't have C4 Gene. Those are two very important supports that without, you would probably feel pretty damn bad. Other than that, I don't know, maybe somebody just pulled for his overall mobility and just didn't like his playstyle that came along with it. There's any number of reasons. Again, neither of them have a lot of votes, so who knows. I'm just going to move on to the next one. Next up, we have the Animo Archon Venti. Now, one reason why a lot of people might regret pulling for Venti is because they eventually pulled for Kazuha. Just Kazuha by himself was enough to really put a dent in Venti's usage rates. However, we didn't need a new character for him to start falling off. The game kind of just did that, just evolving. Since his main usage was to suck things up with his burst, naturally as more enemies started to be put into the abyss that couldn't be affected by his burst, he would just eventually start to fall off on his own. As they say, sucks to suck, especially when all you can do is suck. And no, I'm not talking about you, person using C1 Venti as a main DPS. On to number 8 with Hu Tao, and we have our first graph showing us why people voted, and we can see that gameplay. Clearly people do not like Hu Tao's gameplay. Now, is this representative of everyone? Absolutely not. Hu Tao is extremely popular, that's undeniable, and people generally love this character. Does everyone universally love her gameplay? No, that's never going to happen. There's always going to be people who do not like the way they play. But I think what a lot of people don't like is her C0. Why don't they like it? For similar reasons that people like to talk down on C0 Raiden. They think it's necessary, or they think it's the reason why they are viable or where they are in the tier list. Well, that's simply not the case because it's what makes them overpowered. Without it, they're still very strong, stronger than most other characters in fact. What's likely happening here is people are actually just reporting dissatisfaction with C0 Hu Tao specifically. Now, whether that's actual genuine criticisms about the jump cancel playstyle, or whether they think it's just not that viable, or they're really just placebo affecting their own mind into thinking it's not that good, we don't know. All we know is that some people aren't happy with their purchase of Hu Tao, and that's perfectly okay. Here at number 6, we have Arataki Ito. Now, why might people not enjoy Ito? I can think of any number of reasons, but going by the graph here, it's a little bit of a mess. Unlike most other characters in this poll, Itos look like they're driven by just poor financial decisions / mistakes. I probably wouldn't have even included the impulse pulls option because building pity is something you're always going to regret when it backfires, and it often does backfire. It certainly is still a way of regretting the character, like you can regret that you got them, but I just don't think it's the same as saying like, I regret Ito because I really did like the character, but I just didn't really like his playstyle. It's not the same as me saying, I regret pulling on Layla's banner because I got this. In any case, why would people regret Ito? Well, I can think of any number of reasons. One, his playstyle is very repetitive. Build stacks, spend stacks, build stacks, spend stacks, throw a cow at some people. I find it fun. I can see why a lot of people wouldn't. Team synergy, he basically has none. He has Ito and the boys, which is Ito, Goro, Albedo, and Zhongli, and there's a couple flex spots, but they're almost worse than that exact 4 team, for the time being anyway. I imagine for this very reason, many end up regretting Anemo and Geo DPS. They're rather simple, and they just have a low ceiling because of it. The head empty just hit things with Geobat playstyle, it's not for everybody, and I totally understand that, and that's what I thought a lot of people would have regretted. I thought team synergy / team comps would have been the #1 reason for regretting Ito, because you require 2 other 5 stars and a C6 4-star to be optimal. Though if a lot of people don't have that, his damage is going to suck, his team's going to feel kind of bad, and even when you have that, his damage is just rather average. As for the buyer's remorse, I don't think a lot of content creators were talking him up. I think people just got drawn in by his big, massive personality, and maybe the gameplay didn't quite live up to that standard. Coming in at number 6, we have Eula, with users specifying, well, not specified and dated as the reasons they don't like Eula. And I forgot to take footage of this before the game went down for maintenance. So yeah, enjoy the demo while I talk about her. It's very well possible that when people voted for dated for Eula, they might have literally just meant that physical feels dated, because it is. It reminds me of physical Kaching when I started, or maining Razor for a bit, or even the people who played physical Xiangling or physical Zhongli. And it's entirely possible the people who didn't specify just didn't find a box that said this character is a physical DPS to click. If you're someone out there who hasn't yet gotten their hands on Eula and was maybe looking forward to her next rerun to pick her up, but maybe this makes you a little bit hesitant, let me tell you this. Eula is still perfectly viable. The only time Eula really struggles truly is when the Abyss is cram-packed with things like Abyss Lectors and Abyss Heralds, things that have shields, because then her physical damage really doesn't do much. At number 5, we have Ganyu, with an overwhelming majority saying gameplay. Seeing gameplay is the most stated reason is about as shocking as a new Call of Duty being announced. So many people out there are so eager to tell everyone who will listen just how little they enjoy Ganyu's gameplay. You point and shoot, you point and shoot, or you play Morgana, which I find to be one of the most formulaic and boring teams in this entire game. I, however, actually really enjoy Melt Ganyu. The freedom it gives me from this game's atrocious flaming trash bag of an auto-aim system that can't be disabled is a value that I just can't appreciate enough. Coming in at number 4, we have Xiao, and just like Ganyu, I am not surprised to see him here. I would have expected him to be on this list, and if anything, I'm surprised he's not a little bit higher. Much like Ganyu, gameplay is stated as his biggest reason, and again, completely understandable. The pogo stick is not for everybody. I do believe that there is one moment where everybody at least has some level of regret playing Xiao, and that's the first time they fight any big elite, and they realize just how much they get knocked back. Vishaps are particularly awful. They act like those dudes that when they get hit in the nuts, they go flying backwards like it was Goku that just punched them. That alone is enough to drive me nuts. I hate the knockback, and is one of the biggest reasons why I just never actually play Xiao. However, we're talking about regret, and one of the reasons why I would have expected him to be regretted is because feeling dated. He is dated. He is one of the oldest characters in the entire game. He was in the beta, and he kind of did what he does now, except I hear he was just a little bit better before. But even so, plunge attack spamming, not exactly the most engaging gameplay, so it's pretty easy to understand why a lot of people would end up regretting this character. Surprisingly, not at number 1, we have Childe. Now, why do I say surprisingly? I always heard people crap on Childe. It is an endless stream of non-stop crapping on this character for their gameplay. Now, if you hate this character for other reasons, like his personality, maybe his exposed belly, or purely being related to Tusar, believe me, I understand. I wouldn't admit to being related to Tusar either. But let me paint you a picture instead. You grab a box of cereal, one that everyone knows and loves, but maybe you haven't tried it yet. Let's say Reese's Puffs, because they're more like a dessert than a cereal. You pour yourself a bowl, you add in some milk if you like that, me not so much. You grab a fork to eat it with, already pretty bad start. Then you decide to hold the fork by the prong end instead of the handle. Well, now you've gone and f***ed up pretty damn bad, and you're not really going to have an enjoyable experience eating this cereal. In fact, you're probably not going to have any success at all. The character doesn't really stand a chance to be good if my cat walking across my keyboard could play it better than a majority of players can. Now, is this going to apply to everybody? Of course not. There's going to be people who just actually hate Childe the way he's played, admit that he is a good character and that he's just not for them, and that's totally fine, but that is not the case that I see most of the time. Childe comes up in conversation a lot because he's on reruns a lot. He is a rather popular character, all things considered. People just don't like his gameplay, but I find most of the time it is rooted in people just not using him correctly. Moving on to number 2, we have Klee, and holy hell, where do I even start with Klee? Instead of listing all the reasons why people would regret Klee, let me list the shorter list, which is why people wouldn't regret Klee. It's a very short list. There's only one reason why you wouldn't regret Klee, and that's because you loved the character. You just wanted her for her. You didn't care if she was viable. You didn't care if she was necessarily fun or easy to play. You just love Klee. Some people may not know this because people just generally don't care about this character anymore, but she is arguably the most difficult individual character to play in the entire game, having to put the most effort into her animation cancels to be rewarded with being the weakest 5-star limited DPS in the entire game. Arguably, now that Kachin got buffed and Diluc is a pyro unit, she's probably just the weakest 5-star DPS period. And that's only if you play her optimally, which I can guarantee you 90% of Klee players aren't. They're probably just spamming charge attacks, spamming her auto attack chain, and that's totally fine. Have fun the way you want to have fun. Not everyone enjoys being sweaty and trying to learn these combos and animation cancels. But even in the best of times, she's struggling to keep up with other characters. So if you play her suboptimally, she's going to feel even worse, leading to gameplay feeling really subpar. I just want to emphasize how fun this character is. Her personality is a blast, pun intended. And it's that tied to her popularity that may lead to her and characters like Itto becoming regretted characters. They fall in love with the personality themselves, but maybe the gameplay just doesn't live up to their standards. And at number 1, we have Sino. Poor Sino. He never really stood a chance at not showing up on this list. People were really excited for his character, and he released basically incomplete. What we really need for Sino to really take off as an aggravate carry is something like a Xiangling Pyronado, but for the Dendro element, something that follows him around and continues to apply Dendro for his entire burst duration, which sadly is not very likely because this burst is pretty damn long. But what people mostly voted on was his kit / his damage. Now, my thoughts here are that people were really psyched on Aggravate. People still are. Aggravate is an amazing reaction. After all, just look at what it did for units like Kaching and Fischl. So then you release a brand new Electro Hyper Carry that people have been waiting for over like a year? Well, of course people are going to be excited. They're going to roll for him, and they were bound to be disappointed with what they got because he just doesn't have the tools he needs. Personally, I think it's rather refreshing to see not just like the top 10 weakest characters on this list. You actually saw some strong units like Ganyu and Hu Tao, and even Raiden Shogun made it relatively high, all things considered. I am quite happy to see Yoimiya not on this list, but maybe it's just because nobody pulls for Yoimiya, so if nobody pulls for her, nobody can regret her. In any case, thank you to my patrons and my members for supporting me as always. Links to my socials are down below if you would like to become one of those lovely supporters. Thank you to you for watching this video, and I'll see you in the next one.